Why exactly do startups fail? What is the best pathway for Gen Z to overcome the forces of automation? How do you even take care of your mental health when building a startup? All of these questions and more will be discussed in this 63rd edition of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast with Eric Grafstrom. To support this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and follow our Spotify page. And now, here is Eric Grafstrom.
All right. Thank you, Eric, for being here.
Good to be here, Ayush. Thanks for the time.
So, first of all, I think the biggest question on everybody's mind when it comes to this area is, why do startups fail?
Well, it's a great question, and I think everyone has an opinion. There isn't one reason, but in my experience, I've worked with dozens of venture-backed startups and bootstrap startups over my career. I think there's three areas where I often see patterns, and again, this is from my experience. There's probably things that I may be missing. One I think is not talked about enough, which is, are you building a product or are you building a business? And I'll come back to these. Two is sometimes there's just simply self-inflicted wounds, and the third is time, and time can also be viewed as money. When I talk about building a product versus a business, especially if you're going to raise money from investors, but even if you're bootstrapping this, you have to know that you're on a pathway to build something that not just people will want to use, that people need. You want to look more at it as what are things people need to use, and becomes part of their day to day, week to week, and are willing to pay for. Now, whether you're monetizing through advertising, whether you're doing the premium model or more of an e-commerce business, but you really have to focus on what is the business value there. And I've seen this, mistake where somebody builds something, whether it's building for themselves because they have experienced a certain problem or see a potential opportunity. You really have to kind of look at this as, is this a business? Is this a profitable business? Self-inflicted wounds, I think especially for those that come from more of a technical or creative background, aren't always looking at some of the mechanics, and just simple financial acumen is so important. Take a quick mini course on how to use Excel and run things like a P&L statements and a balance sheet. You don't have to be an expert. It doesn't even have to be pretty, but just what are the basic mechanics of what does it cost to start the business? What does it cost to run the business? And then are you generating enough revenue to make this not only worth your time, but to make this a profitable business? It's a cliche, time is money. I think oftentimes people run out of time, and at the same time they're running out of money. So, those are three areas that I would recommend your listeners think about. And is they're kind of, whether they're at the very beginning or maybe you're in the middle of their startup journey, is to taking a step back and are you building a business? Are you making sure that you're not creating any self-inflicted wounds? And do you have enough time to kind of figure this out?
For sure. Just before I ask the next question, it would be helpful if you could give a quick background to the listeners on how you even got into the industry and what your years of experience was like.
Sure. So, look, I've had a very fortunate pathway. I graduated with a journalism degree from college and spent a little bit of time working in politics before a friend called me and invited me to come down to this little warehouse in Dallas, Texas. And they needed someone to start selling, at the time was webcasting, which really didn't exist, to businesses. And that company became broadcast.com, which a lot of people may know was started by Mark Cuban from Shark Tank and the Dallas Mavericks. So I was early on in this journey and got bit by the entrepreneurial tech startup bug then. And, it was hard. It sounds good because now, you can look back and see the success, but being in that position early in my career where a lot of friends were going off to get, MBAs and law degrees or working with successful companies. And here I was working on something that no one really thought was going to succeed. It really sounded like a stupid idea to broadcast audio and video when people were still on dial-up modems. But that started me on a whole journey that took me overseas, worked in London for a few years with Yahoo, moved out to Silicon Valley with Yahoo, and then grew from a salesperson into a business development executive and then into operating roles left Yahoo and then worked with about, I'm going to guess 20 to 30 venture-backed startups in varying capacities as both a fractional and a full-time executive. Today, I'm the founder of ExitGuide, which is an M&A platform for Main Street businesses, and we'll probably get into more of that later. But a lot of very frontline experience of the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey. Just I work with a lot of founders, and what I tell them before we get into a working relationship is whatever mistake you've made, I've either made it or cleaned it up. So don't worry about it. We can get through this.
For sure. That's very good advice. And it's clear that you've had not just like a bulk of experience would be an understatement, which leads me to the next question. It's kind of contrary or contradictory to the last one I asked, which was why startups fail. But with your massive amount of experience, you're probably very attuned to just looking at a startup or looking at a business plan and then kind of like getting a sense of if this is going to succeed or not. And so the next question is, what do you see instantaneously that leads you to believe that the startup would not be successful? Like what markers or what marker gives you that kind of, yeah, this is not going to be successful, stay away?
Sure, and I think it combines those first two things that I mentioned, which is, are you building a product or are you building a business? One of the things that I tend to say, which I tell people is a bit of tough love if I come in as a startup coach or a CEO coach, is no one cares if you can build something. You just get no credit for it. And it's a hard thing because you make work, days, weeks, months, sometimes even years to create something. And it could be a beautiful product. It could be something that works really well. And perhaps that is something to be proud of. But, when it comes to creating a business around that, raising venture capital or from angel investors, no one cares. And that may sound harsh, but I mean that in the sense of, you have to make sure that what it is that you're building is actually going to turn into a profitable business. And spending too much time on building something that is not going to generate revenue, or where you're not getting, customer feedback, where you're not out trying to sell this to see if you can actually, create a sustainable growing revenue line, it is part of a self-inflicted wound, because you can get caught up in, spending, long hours, 7 days a week in the work it takes to launch something. But if it's something that is just okay and generates, meaningful, sustainable, profitable revenue versus something that, may have this kind of magical experience that you and your colleagues or your peers and your cohort feel is amazing, but no one wants to buy, focus on incremental steps. So it's a journey. There's no such thing as a one and done launch. And make sure you're building a business is the key. I've seen it all too often where people have spent too much time and money on building a product as opposed to building a business.
And it's really important for people to hear that, because when they think of startups, like obviously people think of hard work and
Yep.
long hours, 80-hour, 120-hour work weeks and all of that, but they do assume, I think a lot of people assume that success, if you put in the work and you put in the hours and you have like that brilliant idea, the next Facebook idea, that it'll just work out. And so giving people a reality check is not just important, but it's necessary for a lot of maybe confused, particularly Gen Z, who may be looking at the startup environment and saying, I could do this, I have the work ethic, I have the idea, just like reorienting them. So the next question kind of, again, is contradictory. Is there actual failure in the startup environment, or do you fail forward?
I'm a big believer in failure. All too often has a negative connotation, and understandably why.
Sure.
You have to assume that things will go wrong, and so I'd like to say no, and I think to your point, failing forward, if you've learned something, then you're going to take that forward, especially if you're early in your career. If you're in the first 2, 3, 5, 10 years of your career, you know, it should be a bit of a badge of honor. Now, of course, no one sets out to fail, but if you're growing from that experience and you're taking something away, as long as you're not replicating the same mistakes out of just, you know, being a little bullheaded with, the decisions that you're making. No, I don't think there is. These are just opportunities to learn and grow, and it's tough. It's tough to admit that something may not be working out and have to fold it up and move on. But it is really a journey of being an entrepreneur, and not just one entity that you start early and have this massive success.
How do you segment out a mistake versus something that will help you in the future? So
Yeah.
you began a startup and it's failed. How do you know what to reincorporate and what to leave out in your next venture?
Well, I think some of that has to do, quite honestly, in a personal style of learning.
Mm,
Um, I think some people are more auditory, some people are more, visual, some, experiential. And I think your learning style really is something that is undervalued, or it's not talked about enough, which is, what's the way that you learn? And, I think one is after you have had to maybe, close something down, one of the most important things is to give yourself a little bit of time. I don't care if it's a few days. I don't care if it's a few weeks. It could be months. I think taking too long off is a bit of a challenge. Now everybody's situation is entirely different, but give yourself a little bit of time. Uh, if, for lack of a better description, I've not come up with a better terminology, but I say to get the goo out. And by the goo, I mean just, sometimes it's even when you're just leaving a job. But, if you've had something that you've had to close up, give yourself a little bit of time to process that out. And then when you go back, I think that there's, you can codify this, whether it's writing something down or maybe recording your thoughts, onto your phone. Uh, but I think it's important for you to get perspective also from a couple of people that really trust and care about you, and get their hard feedback. Now, ideally, you get that when things are really, when you're having some challenges. But I think it's important to kind of, go away and look at two things. One is, what are the things that didn't go well? But more importantly from that, what are the things that went right?
mhm,
As a startup and as a founder, your job is to surround yourself with people that complement your skill set, your work style. And so rather than focus just on the negatives and say, okay, I'll take myself as an example. I'm great with identifying market opportunity. I'm terrible with visual design. So I really have to pull in people who are great at taking, the idea for solving a potential problem in the marketplace. But how do you visualize that from a product perspective so that it's intuitive and easy and presents to the user? And so, understanding where you can complement yourself by bringing in people who are far more talented and experienced in a certain area, I think is one of the biggest lessons you have to take away when something doesn't work out, rather than try to solve this all on your own.
And one question that's always kind of befuddled me is, when do you know that you failed? Because in the startup environment, it's constantly, you keep going, like the old Walt Disney story where, he kept on going, and maybe the 292nd no,
Yeah,
after that
yeah,
he got a yes. So when do you
sure,
know that you failed and you need to get the goo out and then restart with
yeah.
something else?
Yeah. Well, let me start with saying something that I think is, fortunately, in the past few years, become more commonplace in terms of discussion, whether it's through Twitter or just out in startup communities, which is, there is no business that is worth your physical and mental health and relationships with people that love you and you love. There just isn't. And so burnout is talked about, and in some ways, maybe it's an overused term, but it's very real. But at the same time, if you find yourself in a situation where, you know relationships with people that you care about and or your physical and mental health are starting to uh, take a hit, it is time to re-examine, because what's the point? of making something successful if it's at the cost of your whole reason for being. I think the other part of it is, and it's tough to have someone who's an investor, but to have at least two or three people who put you in front of any business opportunity in terms of the advice that they'll give you. I've had, very good fortune of people that, I can go to and kind of say, okay, look, I need an hour of your time. And when they're looking at where I am, they can ask a lot of business questions, do a standard kind of assessment of, metrics and things like that. But they can also tell where I am. I had a very close friend of mine ask me, a question, a few years ago, and he said, "Do you still feel like, this needs to exist in the world?" And the question he was asking me was not an uncommon question that someone would ask an entrepreneur. But he knows me, he knows my family, he knows me personally, and the question he was asking was much deeper than, how's the business coming along? And one, I think, if he believed that this was not worth continuing because of the expense and the toll it would take on me, or it was just simply not going to work, he would tell me. And I know that I wouldn't necessarily take that personally in a negative sense. I would take it personally in a positive sense, and that he is looking out for me as a human being. And I think that's very important, is to have, at least two or three. You don't need 5, you don't need 10, you don't need to talk. I mean, talking to a bunch of people to kind of get their feedback on a product or maybe a go-to-market strategy, it makes all the sense in the world. But you need to have at least 2 or 3 people. Family's tough because there's a little bit of there's a lot of bias there. But having 2 or 3 people that will speak to you both from a business perspective, speak into your heart and say, hey, look, I'm not sure this is worth it, or I'm not sure this is going to work out. I could be wrong. I think you got to be able to kind of check your own gut feel on this with a couple of very close people.
But what happens if you don't have those people? I mean, in today's age, we're always seeing news articles and um, videos and all of that on. We're more isolated than ever, and so it might be easy for someone to just put their head down and think of an idea, think that they have a business plan, and just go forth. And maybe they get a little bit of success at the start, and maybe not, but they won't have that social judgment, if for lack of better words.
Sure.
They won't be able to rely on those 2 to 3 close friends, relatives, to put them in check. And so
Yeah.
for maybe the listener out there that is putting their head down and constantly working and doesn't think of failure as an option, how do you um, self-inspect yourself? How do you realize that maybe I should take a couple of days and rethink my strategy and then go from there? Like, how do you get the confidence to do that?
Yeah, in I think it's a very personal thing. So one, if you're early in your entrepreneurial journey, it's never too late to try to kind of build that sense of community. There are a lot of tools that are out there. If you're going to make this thing work, you're going to have to reach out cold to investors, to customers, to potential people you're going to hire. Reaching out and asking for someone to be a part of a community or to join their community. Make that just like you're planning on doing, user interviews or whatever it may be. But the question I would ask, I've asked myself, or when I've gone into businesses where I've joined in as an executive and a coach, is, you have to look at 2 aspects of it. Are you still motivated by the opportunity, or are you more motivated by your solution? And the difference is, like, if you're saying my dream ultimately was to solve this problem, create this market opportunity this way, versus, well, maybe the way I tried it for a year or 6 months or 2 years isn't working, but that's okay because I still see this market opportunity or this problem set as a massive opportunity, and I feel so passionate about that I'm willing to rethink my approach. And that may be a whole new product strategy. It may be bringing in other co-founders. It may be joining another team. And that to me is one of the big differences, which is, have you personalized this so much that you feel like you're the only person that can solve it in a certain way that you come up with? That's a very dangerous position to put yourself in, because you better darn well hope you're right. And if you are right, you're probably lucky, because rarely, if ever, does anyone get it right in the first try. But if you're willing to bring other people along in that journey, you're willing to try different things and put your ego in check and put the opportunity ahead of your own personal view in your ego, it is probably worth sticking around in doing something. But with the big caveat I said earlier, which is nothing is worth the expense of your mental, physical health and relationships with those that you care for.
Just to touch on that point, it's a very interesting and important thing to take into account, which is, are you holding up your life when it comes to a startup? I never thought of failure as something where if my relationships fail, then I've failed. I always thought of failure as, if I'm not making money, then that's a failure. And it's good to take yourself out of that hole and take away the blinders that comes with building something, and to think about, is my life as a human healthy?
Yeah, and there's I'm not going to get this totally right, but the spirit of it is correct. There was a movie a couple of years ago about soldiers during World War II who were going in and risking their lives and the lives of others to save works of art in Europe. And someone will Google this and figure it out. But one of the questions was asked, which is, why are we doing this? We're not saving people's lives, and we're not pushing the enemy back necessarily. But really, it begged the question of, well, if we're not willing to risk saving art, which represents, humanity's progress and all the things that art really represents, well, then what are we fighting for to begin with? And so it really asks this, deeper question about, purpose. And so startups can be all consuming. It can be a complete and total temptress. And you have to, know where you're drawing the line between, is your commitment and hard work to see something succeed kept in balance for, you're going to be on this planet for hopefully, several decades. Is your purpose for doing this driven by an ego to check a box and impress a certain group of people? Or is it really you're trying to do something which is your own talents and your own drive to create something that you think should exist in the world to make it a better place?
Sure. And I think we'll definitely get into this egotistical strive for building the next unicorn and all of that, which is absurd, but unfortunately that's the world we live in. So
totally right.
I guess we'll leave failure for that section and get into something a little more different. But so at the beginning of the year, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, and this had a massive impact on the startup industry, and also massive psychological impact on people who were thinking about building something, and wondering, where the F am I going to get money now? So should we be wary of startup investing with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and the other news articles of startup funds drying up or investing funds drying up? What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, yeah, but what else are you going to go do? Without totally dating myself, but dating myself, I started working in the internet space in the mid '90s. No one knew, right? I mean, Netscape was the dominant browser. Microsoft had not even launched Internet Explorer, which probably 2/3 of your listeners are going to say, "What the heck is that?" Yahoo had just started, so we saw a bust in 2000. We saw the financial crisis in 2008. We saw another course correction in 2022, and there's probably something else that I'm missing, but there are cycles. I think tech has a more volatile cycle than perhaps other industries because of some of the trends and the hype that's around it. We should fully expect, I don't know whether it'll be in 3 years, 5 years, or 8 years, but there will be another course correction in this space. If you are going to hop in the train of trying to be an entrepreneur, uh, no one can really predict where the market is going to go, because in some cases, startups might be counter to what the overall macroeconomic conditions are. You know, we saw during the pandemic, so many people were losing their businesses and struggling, yet especially e-commerce businesses and other internet-based businesses were really thriving because they were serving, a need that really was becoming even, more compelling as people were locked down into their homes. So I mean, should you be more concerned? Yeah, I'd be more concerned in the sense of that's the environment in which we are, but it's also probably a good reality check in a lot of things that were hyped, have come back crashing back to earth. And that's generally speaking healthy for the overall market. But at the same time, as it relates, what should you do for your own personal startup? If you're building a business, it's going to take you at least 5 to 10 years to go build that business. There's going to be these swings in the marketplace between, where you are today and where things will be in 5 to 10 years. If you're in this for the next, 1 to 2 years because you think that you're going to time the market, maybe you're a genius and have figured something out that the rest of us have not. But you really can't let those things dictate what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis, other than, hey, look, if this is an environment that is going to be tougher for me to raise in, I need to take that into account when I look at it operating my business as far as spend and growth and experimentation goes.
I just want to touch on one thing that you said that kind of freaked me out was it takes 5 to 10 years to build a business.
Sure.
All of the Gen Z I've talked to, oh, after 2 years, it's going to be profitable, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. And again, I don't think my generation has a really good understanding of what it takes to build a business and gain money and gain investor money and become profitable. But speaking of gaining money from VCs or angel investors, what's a good strategy for this? What have you seen that is correct, that is very innovative in getting investment
Sure.
money, and what is just a complete turnoff?
Well, one of the things that I would say at this stage in my career, seeing both success and mistakes, focus on building a business that does not require venture capital, and you will attract venture capital. Now, that isn't 100% true. If you're, building a more traditional business and, there's maybe a bit of a cap in terms of, how much this can grow. But generally speaking, if the requirement, for your business to continue to grow and find product market fit requires excessive amounts of venture capital, you probably are setting yourself up for failure. I'll give you an example. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but Andrew Levy, who's the founder of Box Group, he probably made, from what I understand, and again, someone should check this. I'm not going to get this exact right. 15 to $20 million on the IPO. That's crazy. And so here's an insanely talented human being who he is smarter and more talented than I would ever dream to be. I have tremendous respect, but here's someone who took so much dilution along the way. And so, if you're building a business that doesn't require venture capital, but has the opportunity for explosive growth, you will attract the money that you need, and then you have the optionality to take it. So you don't want to follow trends. You don't want to necessarily invest based off hype. You want to bring people into the fold that are going to help you grow your business, and you want to protect yourself from actually, requiring that money to keep yourself alive.
How do you know whether you should take it or you should not take it? How do you make that decision?
One of I think the most important question every founder should ask, and I've said this 100 times, and I hope people really take this to heart. if you have somebody who's willing to write you a check, one of the most important question in my experience is to ask them about a time when a portfolio company that they work directly with had a major challenge or crisis, and what that individual investor did to help them through it. All money spends the same. Everybody loves to retweet, loves to give you kudos, and loves to brag about when things are going well. It's natural. But at the same time, inherently, there will be several moments of crisis in your startup. What you want to find and identify when you're getting ready to accept money from someone is, will they be passive? And passive is okay, right? It's a little bit of no harm, no foul. Will they be toxic? Meaning, are they going to continue to try to drive your product roadmap with their own ideas? Will they, belittle or chastise you, or become just so negative when things aren't going well that they add a crisis on top of another crisis? Or is this someone who's going to step in on your worst days or in one of your most difficult challenges and say, hey, look, I got you. This is serious. This may be an issue, but we've been through this before. We've got your back, and we're going to help you through this through resources, through planning, through maybe it's additional capital. But if someone's going to come along and get you through those negative situations, so it's one of the most important things that I tell people to ask is, you got to make sure that you understand, are they passive? Could they potentially be toxic? Which means don't get into that relationship. Or is this someone, if you ask that question, are they going to respond in a way of, actually, it's a very insightful and good question. Let me tell you about a situation. In fact, I have a founder that you can talk to about how my firm and I, or my team and I, help get them through that particular situation.
How common is the latter type of investor? Is that, are they the needle in the haystack, or are they the majority?
I mean, I think if I'm being candid, I would say that, 70% are probably in that kind of very, passive to somewhat helpful. And that doesn't mean that they don't want to, but I think something that it's hard for entrepreneurs to get early in their entrepreneurial journey is, just the sheer volume of inbound traffic. When you have money to invest in either a good market or a bad market, when you have money to invest, you have so much opportunity coming to you that it literally is like a tidal wave. So it's almost impossible to keep up and be thoughtful, because investors are raising money for their fund. They're trying to keep LPs happy. They're trying to deal with their existing portfolio, and then they're also out trying to find new investments. So I assume 70% are somewhere between passive to distracted, and it's going to be tough for them to keep up. I think there's it's reasonable to think that maybe another 10% out there are toxic, and there's a variety of reasons for that. There's probably a whole lot of psychology and psychiatry that goes into why that isn't who those people are. But it's important to ask around and not just blindly assume that a great name on the door is the best money you can take. And then I think there's another 5 to 10%. I think most, but not all, come from an entrepreneurial background where they've been in your shoes before. Not always the case. So I don't want to suggest that people who've not been an operator but come from a more traditional investing background. But I it's maybe 10 to 15% of the overall market is probably that those people who really go through it. Maybe 20%. I don't think it's a majority, and I think the reason why it's not a majority is for very good reasons. But having passive investors versus those that will really work and come alongside you is really what you're looking for. Chances are you're not going to have a cap table full of people who are in this 10 to 20% that are going to be extremely helpful. It's totally okay. If you have a mix of 1 out of 3 is really going to come in and work hard for you, but the other are just simply passive, and they'll make an introduction when they can or when they have time, but are going to be passive. That's pretty normal.
Kind of a geopolitical question, but is America still the best place to get investment money from? I've heard hints of China, of India, of Saudi Arabia. Is Do you have any thoughts on this? Should someone that's attempting to build a startup just look at America, or should they look at other countries as well?
Well, I think that one of the wonderful things that's happened over the past couple of years is, and we still have a long way to go, but entrepreneurship and raising money from, institutional investors has opened up both for people geographically speaking, from socioeconomics and all, different races. And it's a move in the right direction. I think we still have a long way to go. If you have a network that is trusted and known from a country outside of where you're running your business, and that's a network that you can rely on, and that is indeed a helpful and or passive investor, absolutely, go with the people where you know that they are in your corner. So if you know you're going to get somebody who's extremely helpful, maybe they're outside of North America, maybe they're in Europe or Latin America or parts of Asia, by all means. That being said, understand that there are things within your control and those are things that are outside of your control. And when you're talking about countries like China or Saudi Arabia, we as entrepreneurs and as citizens do not have control or insight into broader political and economic conditions that could be impacted by things, completely and totally out of our control. And so, is it possible you could find yourself working with great investors in a country that, suddenly, political leaders, either there, here, wherever it may be, make a decision that limit your ability to grow into a particular market or get funds from a particular market? You need to be mindful of that. It's not, those citizens are not always representative of their government, but we certainly are impacted by the decision that our political leaders can make. And you need to go in eyes wide open when that comes in, to taking money, for sure.
Where is the best place for anybody in America to get investment money from? Is it still Silicon Valley? I've heard hints of Austin, Texas. What,
Sure.
where are the poles? Where are the centers of investment money in America right now?
Well, bar none, Silicon Valley still, from just dollars invested and concentration of capital, just the numbers are still, it's still, 20x a place like Austin, Texas, where I live. I spent 17 years in Silicon Valley. LA, New York have certainly, risen. Austin is emerging on the scene. But if you look at the concentration, the footprint of investors, outside of Silicon Valley, major markets, whether it's Toronto, Chicago, New York, they're still growing. It depends on the stage in which you are, and I think it depends on the sector. And so, depending on what industry you're in, you may find angel investors in your backyard, and if those are people that are coming from, say, they understand real estate but they don't understand tech, but you're starting a real estate technology company, then go where the money is, go where the people that are going to help you. Those early dollars are important, but the network that people will bring. So you may find that you have angel investors or seed or pre-seed investors that are very sophisticated and knowledgeable about a very niche marketplace or about an industry that is outside of, say, AI or traditional SaaS. So, things have changed so much. I've raised money where over the past couple of years, there's plenty of investors I've never even met in person, and it is the world that we're living in. So, I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. Silicon Valley still remains a bit of a heavyweight, but even people who represent Silicon Valley firms are living in places outside of Silicon Valley, and I think the whole idea of investors telling you needed to move to the Bay Area in order for your startup to succeed has kind of fallen by the wayside, which is completely and totally legitimate and fantastic. You don't have to be there. If you want to be there, that's great, but you don't have to live where your investors are either.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it is. It is important to. I think the best business is still done in person, but it's also, um, you know, we are living in times where you don't necessarily need to be in person to conduct the best business,
Agreed.
or at least maybe in the metaverse, maybe that'll change.
Well, we'll see. Look. I think you can make a lot of progress. Nothing does replace that personal interaction, and I'm a big believer in that. But at the same time, one of the benefits I think I see is you don't have to wait 3 weeks for that in-person meeting to make progress. You can do a couple of preliminary calls or meetings via Zoom and still make forward progress. Now, maybe you need to meet in person to close the deal or to continue to build a long-term relationship where you trust each other and can get through difficult times together. But it's no longer this gatekeeper of, well, until I sit down with him or her in a room, and physically meet face to face. We're no longer relying on that to slow us down.
See, but you touched on something very interesting. There's an underlying philosophy there of still meeting in person, and it seems like that's something you value as well. So could you speak a little more to the physicality of meeting a potential startup or a, a startup founder with a potential investment opportunity? Like what is that? Um, what is the importance of meeting in person for you specifically?
Well, look, when I'm hiring or when I'm building business relationships, I'm looking largely for two things. There's the skill set that they have, and I'm qualified to assess some, but not others. Like I can't tell you whether I don't come from a technical background, so I can't tell you whether an AI engineer, if she's extremely talented. I need somebody who's a very solid engineer to make that assessment before we hire. But at the end of the day, we're humans. I'm looking for two things when I'm building a team, whether that's on my startup or even with relationships with investors, which is curiosity and integrity. Curiosity, I want to know they're curious about the world around them. Do they have an innate curiosity about how things work, what other people do, what makes other cultures, unique and interesting, and that drives a desire to solve things in a different way and find interesting pathways. The integrity comes down to is this person going to do the right thing when no one else is looking? And I think that's doable to get without meeting in person. But I think if you're going to build a true personal bond with employees or an investor, you need to have some level of human interaction. You need to share a meal together. You need to go on a walk together. And maybe this sounds a little bit corny, but at the end of the day, you're doing business with other human beings, and startups are fraught with all sorts of challenges and twists and turns. And some of what's going to make that work is this alchemy between the team of, well, I just know that if I throw this problem up into the air, Ayush and Lisa are they're gonna go figure it out. I don't know how, but I'm gonna sleep at night that you and another person are gonna go figure that out, and vice versa. And I think it's really hard to build that type of relationship without some level of kind of in-person interaction.
Just for the record, Lisa was a made-up name.
Yeah, so that's right.
Because if my girlfriend watches this, she's gonna ask me who is Lisa.
Okay. Yes, I completely and totally made up that name and do not want Ayush to get into any form of trouble. Complete and total fiction.
Thank God. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that.
Yes, I will also take a personal phone call from her and validate that as well if need be.
I'm gonna send her your contact details
Yes,
after this conversation.
That's right. That's right. DocuSign.
So we've talked about kind of the two major things of startups. We've talked about failure and we've talked about funding. So just stepping away from that, coming to the very beginning, or before that even. Are startups a recommended pathway for Gen Z instead of traditional post-secondary? And again, one of the follow-up questions will be, what do you think about skilled trades, which is something we touched on before? So,
Sure.
are startups a recommended pathway?
For some,
Sure.
don't follow the trend. Knowing what you're good at, knowing why you want to wake up every day. I'm a firm believer that, look, there are some people, and this is a completely okay thing to be, but some people are perfectly fine showing up and putting in their 8 hours and getting fulfillment outside of what they do for a living. And that is totally fine. I think there are also a personality trait where, and I put myself in this bucket, my guess is you are too, what I'm doing day to day has to have some kind of cause. And sometimes it's a fight, to be honest with you. But what I mean by that is my cause, or with my current startup is ExitGuide, and that is to democratize mergers and acquisition for small business owners, Main Street business owners. And I have my reasons for motivating that. And some days it's a cause because I feel very strongly about empowering this, kind of generation of people that own these businesses and passing them down to younger millennials and Gen Z. I think it's a great cause. And then other days it's a fight because I feel like there's this very broken system and I'm fighting against the system. If you can find out what is your cause, what is it that fulfills you and gets you into, some people have called it flow, but if it's being an electrician, if it is running a machine that, produces metal fabrication, if it's being a chef, if it's an artist, there's a whole world outside of tech. And so will AI have an impact? I mean, it will, but quite frankly, when you look at some of the things that you mentioned with skill trade and Main Street businesses, it's going to have far less of an impact on those jobs. There's amazing opportunities and ways to have a very fulfilling career and quite frankly, without working in tech at all. So everybody has their own pathway. One of the challenges I think is, as you're younger, are you following a pathway, whether it's coming from parents, whether it's coming from a peer group, whether it's coming from society or the community in which you're raised, which is all completely, totally, very, very, very real? Or are you following a pathway which is with your own innate drive and talents and things that you're good at? And so understanding how you learn, understanding what are your innate skill sets and maybe some of the weaknesses and challenges that you have, and then trying to map a pathway, for growing in a career path that is mapped to these things. I mean, that's where you got to focus.
What is ExitGuide? Could you speak to
Sure.
the philosophy of your startup and why you're
Yeah.
engaged in it?
So I spent, as I mentioned earlier, I spent a long time in Silicon Valley. I've worked in startups for pretty much all of my career. I had a stretch for a couple of years where I was helping venture-backed companies, largely brought in by investors, when there was a problem, and I would come into companies that had overspent, they were running out of money, and maybe had some turmoil. And my job was to assess, is this something that, can be fixed? And if so, how do we fix it? Or do we piece off the assets and sell those? What are the ways? But it's from an investor point of view. And so largely two things. One is I had access to capital to go give me breathing room to figure that out. And two, I had both a network for people that were on a team or within my own, kind of personal professional network to access world-class talent to help me kind of move through these transactions. What I learned is that when it comes to small Main Street businesses in North America, a couple of things are true. One is that most are worth somewhere between $200,000 and $2 million. It's about 35% of GDP. And there are plenty of tools that have been around for these business owners, somebody who may own a plumbing company, a retail shop, a restaurant, or a bar, or a services-based company. they can do formation of that business entity online, but when it comes to exiting, which 100% of them have to do at some point, it's very limited and very challenging for them to go figure out, what is my business worth? What are my options? How do I sell to an employee or a business partner or a family member? And the experts that someone like myself had when I was working for venture backed companies, they're out of reach. They're too expensive. And because 85% of these are owned by boomers and Gen X, you're going to see a huge surge of very real businesses come onto the market, but there really isn't necessarily an affordable, streamlined process for these business owners to kind of move through an exit process. So, the quick way of saying is I'm bringing M&A to Main Street, or I'm democratizing M&A for Main Street. But my mission is to really create a very simplified process for someone to exit their business, which could be anything from selling it to an employee, maybe it's selling the assets and closing, to finding a buyer in their local community and getting through the transaction without expensive resources. We bring in people to help you on demand, but you should be able to do a lot of this on your own.
And what about this gets you up every day and motivates you? Like, how, like, why is this your passion? And what are your thoughts around this passion?
Sure. So, this gets back to, I think I'm wired in a way that other entrepreneurs, probably like yourself, are wired, which is, it's a cause. It's a cause and it's a fight. And it depends on the day. I can have it can be a cause in the morning and be a fight in the afternoon. I think when I look at my career path of working with a lot of these companies in Silicon Valley, I was very fortunate. But at the end of the day, it is unfair that I had access to this level of talent and resources and information for whereas so many real businesses don't. And so this is something that has to happen. The backbone of the economy in North America, are these businesses. It's somebody who paves your driveway. It's somebody who, runs the pest control business in your local community. And this is driving it. But largely there's an imbalance in access to information, resources, and support for something that every one of these business owners has to go do. And the market opportunity, quite frankly, it's in excess of $10 trillion. And that's just demographics. You just take, 85% of these businesses are owned by people over the age of 45. A good chunk of them are actually owned by people over the age of 60. And so, I mean, not to be morbid, but next 20 years, stuff's going to happen.
It doesn't look too bright for them.
Yeah, right. I mean, and so they have to move out. And the question I ask myself is, well, what do you do when it's not a $10 million business that's, really profitable and growing? Those businesses have access to, bankers, M&A advisors, and attorneys who can make money by billing hours against a transaction, whether they're getting paid on a percentage basis, whether they're getting paid on an hourly basis. But if you have a $400,000, car repair shop or pest control business, what are you going to go do? You're not going to go spend $800 an hour on a lawyer, and somebody who's a business broker is not going to want to sell a business that's worth $400,000 when they can sell a business that's worth 15. And so, knowing that this is out of reach for literally tens of millions of people, it bothers me and excites me. It bothers me because I don't think it's fair. It excites me because I think that we can go solve it.
Well, we touched on being an electrician. Um, as a possible passion. So what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on skilled trades? So just to paint the picture of how we got here, because I was talking to you in our previous call about Gen Z is fundamentally unprepared to handle, the future and as using a broad term. Um, they're not really cognizant that a lot of the jobs that they are going to be in or getting into and starting their careers with are going to be automated. And this is a reality. And, as much as you don't like it, it's happening.
Yeah.
And you basically said, and we'll get more into it, but you said, think about skilled trades,
Please.
but
Yes.
but an electrician on the same level as a software developer, because being a software developer is sexy, not just
Yeah.
salary, but also the title and benefits and perks that come with it. So could you just speak more to that?
Yeah, I'll start by saying if I were 22, 23 years old and knowing what I know now, right? So I had all the benefit of my insight. I would absolutely 100% look at learning the skilled trade today. And the reason being is we know a couple of things. One is the population will continue to grow. So, we're going to need more building. We're going to need to repair old buildings. We're going to need to, continue to grow as a society. And, AI can replace certain elements of software engineering today, and that's only going to compound and get better. AI cannot string wire in a building. I know someone not smart out there's gonna be like, well, we're gonna have robots to do that. But like, yeah, but that's really, really far away. That's really far away relative to other things. So one is the population is going to continue to grow. That means expansion, physically and within space, and all those things need plumbing. They need electricity. They need concrete. They need steel. We need new ways of building that are more environmentally conscious, and so that requires people. Two is that you're going to see the largest transfer of wealth in human history over the next 20 years. There is essentially, I'm Gen X, but between basically baby boomers, and then you have Gen X sandwiched in between millennials and Gen Z, you have a workforce that's coming, online. Most millennials are in the workforce today. And so I firmly believe that one of the greatest opportunities for Gen Z is to take on these businesses and learn a skilled trade for a variety of reasons. One is that these jobs are necessary, but two, it's a generation that also will be able to understand, well, how will robotics and AI impact things like plumbing, electrician, all sorts of skilled trades. I wouldn't ask anybody over the age of 60, right? I mean, but if you told me that someone was 20 years old today and was thinking about, well, all my friends are going off to college to get CS degrees, but I really would like to figure out how to do metal fabrication or become a welder. Be like, dude, just go become a welder. How will AI impact welding? I think it's going to be a long time. You'll come out of school, if you're going to get an associate's degree, you will come out oftentimes with a job waiting for you. If not, have your apprenticeship paid for by someone who's saying, I've got 20 open slots and 2 candidates. But you'll be prepared for advancements in technology that will change those industries in some capacity. But it's a phenomenal pathway to independent wealth. I mean, if you could go today, if you could go get a job as an electrician in a company that has, say, 20 to 30 employees with an owner that's over the age of 50, and walk in the door, and maybe you wait a little bit, but say, look, my intent is to take over this business and buy this from you in 10 years, you will become a millionaire. You just will, and you will. That pathway has a far higher degree of turning you into a millionaire than going and taking a job at Meta.
But Eric, see, perceptions matter, and
Yeah,
going and being an electrician is not the same as, again, being a
totally get
software
it.
engineer and
Yeah,
sitting on a beach in Hawaii, and all I need is a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, and I can get my
sure.
8 hours of work, and then shut my laptop off and be on the
Yeah,
beach. And we talked about a reorientation that needs to happen in the minds of Gen Z on thinking about skilled trades as a career path. So how do we
yeah.
start this reorientation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish I had a really solid answer. I would tell a lot of your listeners, look at where the layoffs are, and look at where there's open jobs. And some of that is cyclical, but when you look at um, jobs that are most likely to be replaced through AI, um, it's going to have a much greater impact on jobs and technology than it is in other sectors of the economy. The other is, you know, it's just a matter of how much control do you want to have, and you know, if you are in a skilled trade, you're going to have a much greater control over your destiny than you would be by working for a corporation. But the other is, look, TikTok and YouTube and everything else that we have that are out there. And again, I grew up with all of this. Like these, this is not me saying as an old guy. These aren't like I in some ways, and from a generation where I know the founders of a lot of these companies well before they were who they are today, and we all came up together. I should probably be asking some of them for advice and investment. That's another thing. But I've seen it, and so what I look at is I say, how are you going to grow? I think the myth of being young and sitting on a beach with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, it'll work for some, but I think what you're missing is one is fulfillment, two is the hallway conversation and being around people that you're going to learn from. I don't want to get into the debate of going into the office and not being in the office. I think it's different for every entity, and I think there's probably a happy medium in between for most people. But I get the reason that people like to argue about that. But what you're missing by not working with a group of people that may have 15, 20 years of experiences, things that I've done over my career, which is, if you and I were working, it'd be like, hey, I just come on in and sit in this presentation, or hey, I'm going to go meet with the CFO about something, and it's a budget that affects your team. Why don't you come on in and listen in? And so this whole thing of working by yourself, working remotely, I get it. There's certainly upsides to it, but there's some very dangerous downsides to it if you're under 30. There just are, and I don't know if that sounds tough to hear. People disagree, which you have every right to, but for generation after generation after generation, you know, learning by simply a process of osmosis with just being in that environment is really going to be an advantage. So you simply can't learn how to be an electrician without watching someone doing it. I think it's extremely hard. But I do think that there's also a bit of a fallacy that you're going to become the most desirable person that has that opportunity and freedom to work remotely on a beach. Um, if you're driven, there's an energy you get by working with people, sitting by side with them. So, uh, I get it if someone was later in their career, they said, look, I live somewhere and, a month out of the year, I need to work remotely. But if you don't want to be part of the culture and the core energy and setting the tone and the pace day to day by at least physically being together in some capacity for some period of time, uh, that's a hard thing to really accept. And I think what we're learning though is other things are being automated. Do you want to look good in front of your friends, or do you want to do something you enjoy doing and get paid extremely well for it? There's a whole lot of plumbers and electricians out there driving Porsches perfectly happy with the second home. And they probably don't care about what, their friends think. And, they're probably listening or watching the news and seeing, medics cut yet another 10,000 jobs, thinking, you know, I've got 4 open positions. I wish some of those engineers would come over and, take a couple of years and go through an apprenticeship program because I could keep them employed for the next 15 to 20 years, making a very, very good living.
Yeah. And, I agree with you, but it's also difficult for me to see how a transition of this magnitude would occur, you know, at all. Because again,
Sure,
remote work is just sexy. It just is. You don't
it
have to
is.
travel in the sense of like you don't have to go to work, you don't have to commute, which is the word I was looking for. You don't have to even dress up. You can just, not go on video Zoom calls. It's you get paid the same, and you know you can take naps on your lunch break. Read that on Reddit. I haven't done that, but no, it's just telling a Gen Z, don't go for that. Don't work from home. Don't job hop and work from home, and instead become an
Sure.
electrician or become a plumber. It just, I don't know, and maybe I'm just speaking as an immature Gen Z. I fully accept that, but it just doesn't seem like a light bulb moment. When I talk to Gen Z about automation and they say, okay, well, what do I do? And I tell them skilled
Mhm.
trades, it doesn't strike me as something that they would say, oh, they would, I feel like they would kind of lean back and disagree
Sure.
and fidget and not want to go through that. So again, there's no question here. It's just,
No,
you
I
know,
look at it, I can't speak to it, because I'm not in those shoes, and so um, I hear you, and I wish I had like a pithy statement that someone say, "Oh my gosh, I never realized it." But a couple of thoughts. One is, look, the road is long, and so when I was a kid, I even in college, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and who knows, maybe I would have been a halfway decent lawyer. But I think about trying to be a lawyer now. I'm like, it sounds awful to me. Not because I don't respect the trade, but I'm like, I've learned so much about myself and how I work and how I think and what motivates me that I don't think I would enjoy being a lawyer. So I think, when you're early, it's easy to say what you do or do not want to go do. And like, there's a Yiddish proverb that I love as a bit of a life phrase, which is, if you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. And so I hear that with some people, and they'll say, well, look, here's what I think. And I'm like, well, you know as much as you do at 23 as I did when I was 23. And I had all these plans. And then, life started to happen. And I learned a lot about myself along the way. And that dictated what I enjoy doing versus what I don't enjoy doing. So I think some of this will come down to, some people may try that and they'll find that sitting on a beach trying to work remotely is both isolating, unfulfilling. They're not learning and growing and being challenged as they would be if they were to do something else. Or they're seeing that maybe I'm an okay remote worker, but people are passing me and maybe I'm not doing what I'm set up in life to go do. Two is, I think, there will be changes where I think the speed in which jobs that are remote jobs, the speed in which those jobs will be automated, replaceable, or quite frankly shift. So what people view as, well, it looks like this today in 2023. In 2025, those jobs may be vastly different. Maybe there'll be more of them, maybe there'll be fewer of them, or maybe somewhere in between they'll be very different. But we know it won't be the same. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if what someone views today as sexy or compelling or interesting is going to change. I also see, if you follow a lot of people, I'd encourage those to get online, onto Twitter, and there's a whole host of community and people that are Gen Z that are in SMB tech, so small to medium business technology. And I've met several. I know people who've left venture capital, banking, and technology with MBAs and law degrees or great degrees in computer science from top universities, and they've gone out and bought plumbing businesses. And maybe they didn't learn the trade, but they understand business, and they're looking at getting a license so they can run these businesses. Because what they're realizing is, to make VP at that company or to get that follower level of following on YouTube and on TikTok, and what it's going to require to kind of get that as a sustainable business, or to make partner at a law firm, like, that's a long journey. I mean, I'm a year or two into it, and I'm past the honeymoon phase of having some of this flexibility. And what I'm realizing is, I'm seeing these trucks drive around my community, and I just talked to that owner. I realized that guy's throwing off $600K a year in income, and he's looking to get out of that business. He's a pretty darn smart guy. Should I talk about potentially buying that business? So I think things will shift. Is my point. Long-winded way of saying it, but just keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. Who knows? Who knows where this journey will take you? Keep an open mind to it, because there are a lot of things that you can do that are very fulfilling that will leverage your innate talents.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess closing the loop of the automation conversation. It's a difficult uh, topic any way you slice it, because again, there is no good answer to it. What works
Hmm.
for the advice someone would give to a nurse is going to be different to a warehouse worker, is going to be different to a software engineer, and fundamentally, we don't have an answer to what happens when a large portion of the labor force, of the workforce, is shifted out completely. We don't have an answer to that. Some people say UBI or GLI, guaranteed livable income. Some people say NIT, negative income tax. Some people go for more socialist or communistic solution, which is like subsidize healthcare and education and groceries and all of that. But fundamentally, just there is no good solution right now. And that's why having these conversations is so important, because we need to find a solution before this happens. And believe me, it is happening right now as we speak.
It is.
And again, if you're not cognizant about it, if you're not thinking about it, if you're not wondering how your job and your career path is going to be affected by these technologies, you are going to be left behind. There's no other way to put it. That's the harsh reality.
Yeah. I would add one thing, because I do worry about, I have kids that are 24 and 22. And I was very fortunate to get into the internet space before it was a thing, and I've had ups and downs with that. What I know though is, regardless of what gets automated, maybe we can get to some form of universal basic income, whatever it may be. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. What I know though is we are designed to work, and we are designed to gain fulfillment through serving others in some capacity, and doing something day to day. Even if you had income flowing in, even if I today, let's just say somebody just came in and Bill Gates just called me up and said, I'm just going to wire $1 billion into your account. And if he's listening to this, Bill, send me a DM on Twitter. I will, get you my account details.
Loop me in on this deal as well.
Yeah. And I used to, like I said, 2 for 1. I'll even split the $1 billion with you.
Appreciate that.
I still would have to do something every day. It's not like I could sit and, futz around and watch videos or do like work. Like I'd want to do something. I'd want another cause. I'd want another thing. Maybe it's ending homelessness. Maybe it's something else. I don't know, but like it's still work. I still have to go do something. And, I think the whole thing, and you probably have heard this, but this whole thing of, find your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. That's total bullshit. Like find something that you're good at, that the world values, get paid for it, and work is a part of in a facet of your life, as is socializing with friends and family and loving others and all those other things that go into making us human. But fundamentally, you got to find something that is interesting and compelling, that is a craft and is going to be work. So regardless of where we end up on this thing, and again, I'm not smart enough to figure that out, you still have to find something. So don't do what the world tells you to do. Do what you are designed to go do. If that's working with your hands, awesome. If that's working with a laptop, great. If it's working with a paintbrush, fantastic. Go figure those things out, and embrace your ability to kind of find something that leverages it. And it is work. It isn't always going to be this magical thing.
Sure. No, beautifully said. I guess getting back to the topic of startups and entrepreneurship, how do you think Gen Z should think differently about being entrepreneurs? Think differently to the millennials or to Gen X or the baby boomers?
Starting a startup in the technology space has never been easier. And I think that's a good thing, and it's also potentially a bit of a danger. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So Gen Z is different than Gen X for sure, and even millennials, in that, because the barrier is relatively low, you need to really ask yourself, why you? Why am I doing this? Am I doing it because getting it out of the gate is easy, or am I doing this because something bigger, right? Is this a cause or is this a purpose that I can get behind? So I think both the combination of the ease of building something, creating something is relatively low and affordable, and there's probably some type of uh, you know social feedback that you get that provides a little bit of a dopamine hit if you launch something and everybody, yay. Um, but really ask yourself, it's more important than ever. Why you? Why now? And is this something that you feel is a purpose worth really putting your time and money and effort into? If it's not, but it's too easy to start, yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, either it's not going to have the success, and you're going to say, okay, what did I just do with the past 2 years of my life? Or maybe it's something that you kind of get into, and now it's more of a burden than it is something that excites you every day. There's plenty of people that have started something where they're like, I don't know how do I get out of this, because I've got enough customers that I kind of pay my bills, but I really don't like doing this. And so no one wants to buy it because it's not on the business. So, I think Gen Z really has to take a look at these kind of really important philosophical questions about starting a startup, because of what's available to them to get it going that simply didn't exist 20 years ago, much less 5 years ago.
So I figured out why me. I figured out why now. So what skills and traits must I have in order to be successful in a startup?
Well, don't let not knowing what you're doing stop you. um,
Yeah.
you know,
It's intimidating,
I
but it's important. Sorry.
well, yeah, and look, I have not been qualified for any job I've had over the past 20 years. I mean, who the heck hires a B minus journalism major to become CEO of a tech startup in Silicon Valley? Like, makes no sense. Um, but I was very fortunate to find myself in situations, and I had to earn my way into them, and I had to kind of get in the door where I stepped in way outside my comfort zone. I just, you know, I mean, it was a struggle and still is today, but move past being afraid of looking like an idiot or being afraid of failure. Um, you are more equipped than you think. And so what skills do you need? Look, early on, no one wants to talk to you, and people will give you, hey, I think what you're doing is awesome. Like it'll people will encourage you, but not everybody's going to stand by you. So you're going to need to figure some of these things out. Um, so start with what's within your control, and continue to make incremental progress each and every day. Um, the skills, like, you can beg, borrow, and steal. We're in a very different environment where you don't have to find somebody who's a 20-minute commute from you. You can find somebody in Nigeria or in Iceland or Australia, and start to kind of build that way. Um, so, eventually, though, you're going to learn what's your craft and what are the things that you're really good at and what are the things that you need to outsource. But don't let any of that stop you from getting out of the gate.
Sure, sure. I, there's a bunch of people close to me who suffer from this. I don't know if it's a syndrome or just a facet of being human that they don't feel qualified um, to apply to any job, let alone a job.
Mm.
What advice would you give to them? Is it just, fuck it and go for it, or is it something else?
Well, I'd want to know why they don't feel qualified. If there's something deeper there that maybe they're looking at the wrong job, would be my first question. Like, if they're saying, like, I'm not qualified, like, okay, let's unpack that. I mean, why do you think that is? And is it because your parents thought that you should be a software engineer, or you should be an attorney, or you should be this? And okay, that's not going to go away. Like, if you're applying to jobs that you don't want, or you don't feel like map to who you are as a person, that's a whole different set of issues, and you need to go address that.
Yeah.
Um, but if it is something that you're like, no, I always wanted to do this and go do this, then yeah, I do think it's hey, look, um, the secret, which you do learn, a lot of people don't know what they're doing. Um, again, people are like, how'd you get to that? I'm like, I made a whole bunch of mistakes. Look, if I can figure this stuff out, you can. Um, I have tremendous respect for people who say, "Oh man, I did that, and it blew up in my face." But I did get up and I went back at it. Last thing I need when somebody comes in the door is to tell me how accomplished they are, or where they went to school 10 years ago, or how smart they were. Whatever. I'm like I need to know today. Right back to what I look for when I hire is integrity and curiosity. Mm-hmm. If you're curious, even if you had success academically or professionally, you are going to seek out the next challenge and the next opportunity that's going to test you. And we all go through that. And I recognize that when I see that in younger people as well, which is they don't bring ego, they bring curiosity to the table every day. They're hungry to learn, they're hungry to change, they're hungry to interact with people that are different from them, come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives. How do we move through and solve this bigger, greater issue and take advantage of this bigger, greater opportunity? So yeah, you need to get past it, and it's not an easy thing to go do, but you're way more capable than you think you are.
It's good to hear. It's not many people think like that. Everybody has their insecurities and their anxieties, but hearing from someone as accomplished as you are that that's all BS and that they should just go for it and they have.
I will say this. I truly believe this. Part of what I've whether you call it an accomplishment or whatever it may be, but I will say a lot of us. But I'll say this for myself. I was smart enough to get into the room and too dumb to realize I shouldn't be there. And by that I mean, look. If you paint this picture of everybody, who you're following has these things figured out, or that they're smarter than you really are fooling yourself. And so, I had the chance to be in a lot of different rooms with a lot of renowned people. And what I realize is, yeah, some are truly unique and gifted, but for the most part, like me, they caught a couple of breaks. They ran through a couple of doors. They had to break into a couple of windows. I mean, you had to just kind of move your way through. And as we as a society start to open up and be more open-minded about people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures, and all these other things, it can and does and should create a more competitive field. And so you either embrace that or you look at that as a negative, but the world's going to continue to grow and it's going to continue to move forward. There's plenty of opportunities that are opening up each and every day. Some will die off, but new ones will come online. But curiosity will carry you very, very far in life. Don't be afraid of being qualified. And I'll close with this. It's the inverse. I think Warren Buffett, but I'm not sure. If you don't know who the idiot in the room, it's you. What I tell people is, if you find yourself as the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Exactly.
Just get into a room where people are nice, they're kind, and if you feel like you're the dumbest person in the room, stay in that room.
Yeah. Not knowing is also a strength in a sense.
Absolutely. I have a thing that my kids to this day will tell us, which is, I learned this in my career, and I say, and I've heard them even say it back, which is great because they're young adults now. The phrase "I don't know" is always okay to say as long as it's followed by the word "but" and then something else. I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. I don't know, but I'll figure it out. I don't know, but I think so and so and so and so and I can go figure this thing out. If you just say I don't know, well, then it kind of falls there. And if you say I don't know, but, and then you blame something or you attribute it to something that's beyond your control, completely and totally not helpful. But taking ownership and demonstrating the curiosity and the drive to go figure something out is great. So I don't know, but is almost a career changing mantra that people can implement, is just say, I don't know, but I can figure out how to become, better at that, or I don't know, but I can learn that skill.
For sure. It makes you proactive rather than reactive to a
Completely.
situation.
And that's what leaders look for.
Absolutely.
So what's what leaders look for, which is, I'm not looking for somebody who's qualified to do the job today. I'm just looking for somebody who is going to be qualified to do the job tomorrow. And if you're telling me you need to fall back on things you did 5, 10 years ago, maybe that's helpful and it's informative, but are you willing to adapt and change with the kind of ever-changing environment they're in? And are you willing to attract and empower people who have that same level of curiosity and drive?
So I figured out why me and why now. I'm, starting a startup. But what is the harsh reality of startup success? In by your standards or by what you've seen, what would you say to a Gen Z who's listened to this and has taken notes? But what would you tell them is just like, you need to focus on this, and this is the reality of the very this is the marginal reality, uh, a reality for the minority of successful people. you know what would you say to them?
It's temporary and it's not life fulfilling. You know, I've known people who have made tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, and you realize, your generation hears this, which is, no one wants to hear somebody, which is, I made $100 million because I started Lycos. And I don't know who started Lycos, but like, probably never heard of the company, but like, Geos, like, one is it's temporary. So if you started something and saw wild success and that's what you're pinning, all of your credentials on, um, the world is not a very kind place. We're all going to move past that. So even if you still have $100 million in the bank, no one cares about this thing that effectively is outdated. But the more important question, the more important reality is, you need to have things, and this is why I at the top of this conversation said, your startup isn't your identity, and it can't be the thing that costs you your relationships and your mental health. So, if you have success, what are you going to do with it? And if you don't have relationships and people that you can be vulnerable with, I'm not sure that's success. There's a lot of people online that are very famous. I'm not sure if they're really good friends. Are they empowering their communities? Are they have healthy relationships with, siblings, parents, spouses, partners, kids? There's a lot of rich disasters out there.
Speaking of mental health, and this is one of the last questions, but we touched on, you've mentioned it at least twice on this podcast, where when you see all of your friends get CS degrees, that can kind of
Sure.
make you anxious, because you
Mhm.
start wondering, what am I doing here? Everybody's moving past me. It's like you're just standing and then everybody else is running. So, and this is just one example, but mental health in the startup space is a very, very significant factor on whether you're successful or not. How do you manage your mental health when you're starting a startup? When you're in a startup, what what should you look out for? How do you know when to take a break? Is it
Yeah.
just as you touched on, are your relationships faltering, or are there precursors to this that you can mention or talk about?
I think regardless of what industry you're in, this isn't my saying, but it's a great one, which is, there's two types of people in the world: those who are in therapy and those who should be. Um,
Mm.
it's like going to the dentist, man. I mean, people are like, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm like, I don't have any cavities, but I still go to the dentist twice a year and get a cleaning and have a checkup. I still go to the doctor and, um, get a checkup just to kind of what am I what may exist that I'm not seeing. Um, so in general, mental health is a proactive thing that you need to be on top of, just like you would with any other parts of your physical health. As far as you know, if you're in it and you're wondering whether you're suffering from burnout or whether it's taking a toll on your mental health, uh, I that's where I go back to. I think this whole thing of sometimes people say community is everything. I think when you overuse certain terms, it loses its value and its meaning. But I do think um, having two different types of communities. One is people who are in your journey and can share that, whether it's other founders, whatever it may be. My goodness, please find something that's outside of this world. Um, I joined the local chamber of commerce here in Austin, and on Friday night, I went to an event, and what I love about it is no one there's in tech. They work at banks, they run retail businesses, service-based businesses, and when we meet, it's great because no one there cares about raising money from venture capital or doing this or doing like it just, and so it takes me out of my head and in that world. So having a community of people that share your journey, but also they could be something that's at a church or a mosque or a synagogue or volunteer at a food bank or something like that. Get something that is completely and totally out of the world in which you operate in, because if you're going to think about this thing 24/7, 7 days a week, 365, yeah, you will eventually break. And one of the ways that you can break is one, to unload with people who understand it, but also get your brain out of it completely and totally in something that gives to other people. And like I said, I mean, I would say a part of this group with this Chamber of Commerce, I'd be shocked if 10% even know what the heck I do for a living. And I love it. I love it. I love it. Just because it's like, they don't care. They're just like, oh, how's your thing going, man? Right. And sometimes they'll ask me questions like, internet stuff. Like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing with my email marketing. Like, and I'm like, yeah, I know a guy. I can help you with that. And then I learn about their business, and I'm like, my goodness, these people like make a real living. They're paying their mortgages. They're doing really well. They're successful, and they're completely and totally out of my space. And I learn something almost every time that I talk to them about business.
So it's important what you said. The therapy little tidbit, because everybody's so obsessed with physical health and going to the gym. At least 5 times a week, and
Yeah.
push, pull, legs, and all of that. But no one ever
Yeah.
talks about mental health. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing for your mental health every day? And even more so, like, you have rest days in the gym. Have a rest days for your regular life. Like, meditate. 15 minutes of green space. There are so many scientific articles that show that that's beneficial. Take walks.
That's right.
Have some kind of social contact, call a friend.
Yes.
It seems simple, it seems duh, but it's surprising and striking how many people don't do this. People don't realize that spending 5 hours a day on YouTube or scrolling through Reddit or scrolling through TikTok and Instagram, well, number one, scrolling through all of these things, you're degrading your focus and attention, which
Terrible for you.
it's horrible.
Yeah.
But number two, it's like you're getting mental fatigue. You have to realize that using these platforms, which are addicting because billions of dollars have been put into these platforms to
That's
make
right.
them addicting.
Yeah.
You have to understand the forces that are conspiring for your attention, for your focus, for your money, for your time and your data,
That's
and all
right.
of this. You have to realize this because it all plays a significant role in how your mental health functions, how your mind functions.
Yeah. Look, the recent disaster with uh, the submarine that is off the coast of U.S. Canada. Again, I'm not going to weigh in on that, but one of the things that came up was how little we know about the ocean floor. We know more about Mars than we do, you know, what's beneath us in the ocean. We know a lot more about physical health than we do mental health in the brain. But there are some things that we know, which is um, if you don't take care of it, you know, there's likely negative consequences, and some of that is physiological. Exercise absolutely helps. You know, uh, illegal drugs, illicit drugs can have a negative impact. Alcohol, other things. But we also know what can benefit from it, and the challenge is that because it doesn't manifest itself physically, it's not like a wound where somebody could come in and be like, "Hey, you've got this gaping wound on your arm. Like, you've got to go get that cleaned out and go to a doctor." You would never think about ignoring that. Um, so, this whole thing of hustle culture and all this other stuff, I'll just tell you, somebody who's been around for a long time and been through all this, it's all total, complete, and total bullshit. Um, you know, find your passion over work at bullshit. Like, you know, uh, work is hard, regardless of whether you're working a W-2 job or whether you're doing a startup. It doesn't define you. And if you're going to take care of yourself physically, you should be putting in, just as many hours as to what's taking care of yourself mentally and getting professional help, even when things aren't in a crisis. Just like we go to the dentist and get checkups, just like we go get a physical every so often. Um, I wish, you're in Canada, I'm in the US, but I wish US healthcare companies would pay for at least, 4 therapy sessions a year, just like dental plans. You get 2 checkups a year, but again, that's a whole nother topic. But if you have the ability, both in terms of financially as well as within your community, do that. Um, because it's important. But get outside of your own head.
Because one thing people don't realize is depression or depression-like symptoms, they build in the background. They
They do.
accumulate like dust. If you're not
Yeah.
dusting your counter, it's gonna eventually it's gonna be, horrible for you. And
Yeah.
then, you're coughing for some reason because you haven't dusted your countertops.
Yeah.
It's a very similar thing where if you're not paying attention to the forces um, that you're consuming on a daily basis, people don't realize they understand the notion of you are who you hang out with, or you are the 5 people who you hang out with as an aggregate, but they don't abstract that out onto social media. So you're constantly consuming people, you know, maybe there's a negative influencer or a negative personality in the social media space. I'm not going to exactly say the name because I don't want to give more traffic to that person, but we all know who we're talking about. But if you're constantly consuming these people, you are going to be negatively affected by it.
Yeah.
You have to realize that it's like social media is becoming like I forget where I heard this quote, but it used to be that social media and the internet is what you used to do to escape life, but now life is what you do to escape social media and the internet.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah.
It's so ingrained, and so if you're not checking up on yourself, right, and
Mhm.
realizing what you're consuming, like go through your search history, go through your YouTube watch history, and then imagine doing that for hours a day for the next
Yeah.
months and weeks.
I,
It's
I think there's 3 things you can fill a feed with:
true.
knowledge, positive nonsense, and negative nonsense.
Yeah.
And I think all too often we let the algorithm fill our feed with the negative nonsense.
Well, because people don't realize that that's what gets clicks. It doesn't.
That's right.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Neurotically click in their minds that the most outraging, the most misogynistic, the most
That's
homophobic,
right.
the most absurd uh, content is what goes viral. And why does it go
Yeah.
viral? Because everybody's responding to the outrage. Outrage is what gets clicks. And so if you're
Yeah.
constantly on these platforms and all you're consuming is outrage, well, now it makes sense why all of these platforms are just suddenly riddled with negative nonsense, to use your words.
Yeah.
But you
Look,
need to have so much understanding in order to make these or in order to have these understandings. Please go ahead.
there are a lot of people out there. If you seek them out, there are a lot of people that are creating great content that teaches you something. I've learned a lot about clean eating from various people, and generally they're doctors, nutritionists, experts in the field, and they're yeah, are they trying to build a brand? Yes, but they're not trying to shill something. They're credentialed. They know what they're talking about. Use common sense, and so um, you know all sorts of things you can learn about that are constructive. When I mean positive nonsense, for me, a little bit of sports, cooking, and then there's just kind of funny stuff that doesn't. It's never laughing at someone. It's always something that is more positive. Negative nonsense tends to be hurtful. It tends to be inflammatory. It tends to be misleading. It tends to create humor at someone else's expense. Um, and just proactively remove that. I think but this takes 15 minutes to go through, whatever platform you're on and curate and add, you know, 5 to 10 new follows that are going to educate you and or provide. And I like to think I'm 70% knowledge and 30% positive nonsense, whether that's totally accurate or not, but that's what I strive for.
And you know, people like Andrew Huberman, people like Tim Ferriss, people like Dr. Peter Attia, Dr. Andrew Huberman, Dr. Lex Friedman, all of these, it just subscribe to them, follow them, and then consume only their content for like 6 months, and then watch how your mind changes. Watch, this is what I
Yeah.
did.
And these are people that I follow. I also have added, um, you know, people who are also look at Yo Yo Ma. Um, is an amazing follow. If he's a world renowned cellist, he's also kind of a fine, interesting dude. But he's I've seen videos of him, especially during the pandemic. But I've seen videos of him where he takes his cello out and he's playing in a field with somebody who's playing the bagpipes or doing something phenomenally interesting. So find some of these niche things. I mean, I happen to love different types of music, and so I follow certain musicians, not because they want to become a social media personality, but maybe they're a little more, whether they're into bluegrass or whether they're into, uh, you know, teaching people about African American culture and in history, through music and how that emerged, through a horrific time period. But they're using that as a way to engage people, around the country, around the world. There's a lot of niche stuff that's out there. You just have to go seek it out. It's not hard to find. And it doesn't always have to be high intellect. It can be other things that just challenge your thinking. I was just watching something last night that was a famous, organist out of London who, has developed this massive following online. And people are going to say, who is it? Now I can't remember. But, she's playing this insane instrument so well and teaching people about it and never intended to become a huge creator on these platforms, but she is, and she gets this joy of being this kind of classically trained organist who's playing Bach on a organ that has something like 2,000 pipes or something insane like that. And it's absolutely stunningly beautiful, but it's very pure in terms of what she's trying to bring to the world. So, yeah, I agree with you. Fill it up with some knowledge, fill it up with some fun nonsense, and avoid the negative.
And it, it's easy to think that you'll eventually go and start consuming knowledge or positive nonsense, but you also have to realize that the information supply and the content supply on any given platform is literally endless. You will never get through your feed.
Yeah.
Endless scroll. You'll never get through all the videos on YouTube. So if the supply is endless, you might as well endlessly consume knowledge,
Yeah.
things that are going to benefit your life. But
Yeah.
one thing I noticed is that you talk a lot about music, the organ, the cello. What has music done in your life, and what does music mean to you?
It means a lot. I love everything from, you know, punk to classical to jazz, and house music. Uh, you know, music, and not all, but most music is an expression of who we are. So, it's an art form, and um, I think it's a way to really understand the human condition. I think it's a way to understand someone's worldview. Um, if you see a painting you don't understand it, read about it or ask the artist if you have the opportunity to do that. Um, I'm a big foodie. I love to cook, but what I also firmly believe is food is one of the best connectors of us. Even if you find somebody who maybe on paper you would have every difference in the world and every reason to have some animosity, you ask them about their food, is a gateway to learning about their culture and to explore that. So, yeah, I mean, music for me is something that I listen to every day. I listen to a lot of classical music. As an ADHD adult, it's easy for me to get distracted. So I put these headphones on. I have a lot of classical music playing in the background, allows me to focus.
Who are your
Um,
favorite artists or
as far
composers?
as composers, um, I actually love Franz Liszt. I love Rachmaninoff. Um, Debussy. Mozart and Beethoven, and some of the others are fantastic. I'm always huge marvel from a performance standpoint, and Wynton Marsalis, who is from a famous jazz family in the U.S., and he's performs a lot of classical music, for the trumpet, but he's also the leader of Lincoln Center for Jazz, and so he's just somebody that I marvel at, and maybe a musician will say actually across being able to do jazz at that level and classical maybe isn't that hard for somebody, but I look at that, I'm like, couldn't even do one of those. Um, you know, so there's a lot of great stuff out there, and supporting local classical music stations is something that I like to do and would encourage other people to do. And
Jazz is fantastic.
jazz is fantastic, and I want to give one plug. I follow these guys on Instagram, Black Violin, and it's two classically trained African American guys. I think they're out of Philadelphia, I may be wrong, but they do these like concerts that are just like pop concerts almost, like in terms of the energy and the setup, and they're out and they're bringing classical music, but then they infuse it with hip hop at times, and they're bringing it to a generation in part of the society that normally you wouldn't associate with classical music. Follow these guys. They're just like, when you just look at somebody and you're like, yay, on like, that makes me feel great about society. Like, these two guys are just freaking awesome.
Yeah. 100% will link to them in the description. So
Yeah.
there's an
Yeah.
easy link for people to check them out.
Cool.
Eric, we've been going for almost 2 hours. So
Yeah.
I'll ask you
You'll have to cut this back.
question. No, 100%. It's good. We've gotten through so much great, interesting, and important content. So this is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. So what advice do you have for Gen Z?
Don't lose hope and ignore what's out there. It's easy to amplify the negative. The world is a better place than what media is telling you.
It's fantastic. And it's easy to lose sight of that. And
I
so
know.
always remembering that. Write a note, put it on your wall,
Yep.
whatever it takes.
Absolutely.
Eric, this has been a fantastic conversation.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for your time and the opportunity.
Fantastic is an understatement. Thank you for being here. Where can we find you in cyberspace?
You can find me. It's Eric Grafstrom, and the last name is Graf, like Frank, and then Strum. Eric Grafstrom .com, or on LinkedIn. And if you want to follow me or try to connect with me on LinkedIn, please mention Gen Z Diplomat Podcast. It'd be great. I'd love to connect with people who are part of this audience and try to make time and see if I can be of help to you.
Fantastic, and we'll make sure to link to all of your social socials in the description as well. Once again, Eric, thank you so
Very
much
good.
for being here.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. To support it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and follow our Spotify page. Please check out Eric's links in the show notes. That is the best way to support our guest for being on this program. As always, the more we talk about what future we want, the more likely we are to build a future that we deserve. Thank you for listening to this episode with Eric Grafstrom. Please check out our other episodes, which are linked in the description. And I'll see you again for future editions of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast.